Hello, I'm Ben Thomas. We're sat here today in Net Consulting's headquarters in Cardiff. I'm joined by Glenn Morgan, and today we're going to talk about how to tackle increasing demand on IT as a service with diminishing budgets. So Glenn, we recently conducted some market research. We asked different organisations all across the UK what sort of challenges they were experiencing with their IT. And 50% of them came back to say, there was an increasing demand on them delivering IT as a service, but diminishing budgets. Is this something you see frequently?
Yeah, pretty regularly, to be honest. There's always, ITTs and bids and these things that come around, and the budget that's allocated to achieve the ask there's quite a disparity sometimes. So it's trying to find ways of being as efficient as possible to try to deliver that.
So how can companies tackle this problem?
A couple of ways, really. The first and foremost, lots of companies are reeling. Obviously, again, COVID hit, and they suddenly had to change all their IT to support a remote workforce. Buy all the licenses and all the kind of things they needed that to happen. And really, one of the best pieces of advice I've seen recently was now reevaluate where you are as a company, because all the initiatives you had long-term plans for, they might well have changed. Because we've seen some companies who are never going back to an office again. They just don't need the bricks and mortar. They can all work remotely, bar a small skeleton presence. Other companies hybrid, and other companies that it's just not an option for them, like factories or retail stores, etc. So reassess exactly what you are after now. What does your business look like now? Because the money you were allocated to spend to do things might not be valid anymore. Yeah. So you could move that budget around to far more pressing things.
I suppose, we've discussed in a previous video, around SD-WAN and SASE, there's a level of automation that can also be built into IT service delivery models these days.
Yeah, one of the huge things that SD-WAN and partly SASE was geared for was saving time in configuration. Because they're largely around how businesses and people think. So as in our finance department needs access to our finance application. They don't think in terms of really low level things that you need to do to configure in traditional networking, for example. But all of those traditional networking things take an awful lot of time to plan and test and validate. So the rate of change suddenly becomes difficult because people are thinking at that speed and thinking in those terms, and trying to do all the rest takes a hell of a long time. So managing to move to a kind of software-defined approach, suddenly your admin time goes down dramatically, because you can select things and go admin department, admin application there, and it'll do the rest for you. That's the level of config you need, as opposed to all the previous planning and wondering. So your rate of efficiency goes up. So your staff time, your IT staff time, is freed to do other things, but fundamentally as a business you're a bit more agile, so therefore you can move people around, you can plan accordingly, you can put people where you like, because SASE will help you do that. So that will give you the visibility of what people are doing, what applications are allowed to use, where they are, and be safe in the knowledge that they are secure, even if they're in a public cafe or home or whatever. Because it's geared to doing all of that. So they are useful things to help mobility and connectivity in a much easier way. So your admin time goes down hugely to free your staff up to do other things. The other angle that we see a lot is in automation. So it's been around for quite a while, obviously, but when you start to think about some of the repetitive tasks, so say if you have a cyber operations team, for example, they'll see something and they'll have to spend quite a bit of time trying to investigate and finding more information about certain aspects of it, for example. So we've seen this happen, right? Is that a known threat source? Is that, flagged as a warning, et cetera, et cetera. And all of that takes time. And obviously that means less tickets through and therefore less productivity. So automating a lot of that suddenly cuts down kind of half an hour's worth of work to 5 minutes, because by the time that incident lands with an analyst, all of that has already been found out. So there's a huge amount of time saving. So there are things like that that people haven't necessarily latched onto. Because again, in IT, the last year sent IT departments reeling, just trying to cope with what's changed.
Yeah.
But now you get the chance to start to think about these things moving forward. And that's where you can kind of start to certainly shave off time and edges. And the other kind of advantage of the SASE aspect, sorry, looping back a bit, having that visibility of suddenly what people are doing, so it's not just what's installed, it's actually which applications are they running. Yeah. That gives you a pretty good view to say, well, you know, we're paying licenses for 10 of these applications that we've never seen used by one guy. Yeah. So, you know, we don't need to renew that. Yeah. And you can start to eke out little parts like that. Yeah. And kind of move on.
So with the changing IT service delivery models, you know, obviously the new normal is looking like it's going to have, you know, at least an element of remote working, if not a large amount of remote working included in that. Is there an opportunity to consolidate costs and potentially, you know, reinvest budget elsewhere within a business?
Yeah. So one of the helpful things, if you are having a remote workforce and you need to secure them, a SASE solution is absolutely the way to do that simply. But what that also gives you is the visibility as to what people are actually using application-wise. Yeah. And to what extent. So understanding that, having that information that you never necessarily had before, suddenly gives you an opportunity to really see what's going on and look at it. And so you might find there's a whole set of applications that you're paying maintenance on that get used by one person. So you can claw that back, you know, as a license cost quite easily. There are others that will be, you know, purely office-based type applications that only facilitate office-based things. Or, you know, even some like meeting room applications, for example, that you pay a big subscription on to handle 100 or 1,000 users. When your meeting room is now probably only going to start to have a 50 to 60. That's something else you can kind of cut back on. Any of those SaaS services that are, you know, really focused on a building or being in an office. You know, if that's not where your people are anymore, they're kind of things you can start to claw back and invest elsewhere.
Given that, you know, there has been such a massive shift in the last 18 months and, you know, the reliance on IT to underpin business operations is clear, you know, should now be a time where companies are looking to claw money back? You know, should there be cuts in IT budgets or should they be looking to invest in IT to underpin business operations?
I think what COVID has taught us, if anything, is that you really need IT for your business to function. Because you can imagine the circumstance where somebody literally you have to be in a particular place to function, and there is no remote connectivity, and they're not using cloud services, and you know they haven't invested any remote access software. They would have struggled quite hard, you know, when this pandemic hit. And the companies that were already kind of thinking along those lines and had made the investments to sort of get there and progress and you know, have the business continuity, if you like, then you know they were the ones who kind of made a very small shift and survived and went on quite happily. So they are absolutely the route to kind of go.
Absolutely, you know, it's definitely been a turbulent year for business, but you know, I think, you know, businesses have to identify what's actually given them continuity through this pandemic. But, you know, at the same time, you know, there are plenty of IT departments that I'm aware of that have massive inefficiencies in their spending and, you know, how money is used throughout an IT department.
Yeah, as I said, most firms have been, you know, had a quick IT reeling scenario where they had to make everything work remotely in a way they never had before. So again, the strong advice is look at what you plan on doing from here on out, because the plans you had prior might not align anymore with what you're trying to do. So if you are planning on having, you know, gigantic WAN pipes and big firewalls and intrusion detection systems in an office that is now staffed with half the people you had, move that budget somewhere else. You know, do that detection in the cloud with a SASE offering, for example, to let remote users get protected that route.
So Glenn, I think we've probably covered these off at some point through this video, but what are your top tips for, you know, making the most of your budget in any given year?
Sure. I guess the first thing is to really base a decision on the actual facts of the matter. So visibility comes into an awful lot, because if you are assuming things work one way, unless you have some actual genuine visibility into what's happening, you might find they work in a completely different way, and your decision is based on misinformation. So definitely recommend, having something in place that at least lets you understand how your resources are being consumed, how your users genuinely work, how things happen. Because without that, as they say, you can't protect what you can't measure what you don't know. So find out your estate. Some of it may be completely irrelevant with your new way of working, and really focus on the stuff that matters and how people want to use those resources to move forward. And that's, focus your investment there, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Visibility is key to any sort of strategic decision making.
Yeah, so once you have visibility and you understand what you have and what you need, the next thing is, do a bit of research. Everybody likes to, Google things, but there's a huge amount of information out there. And probably the next bit of advice would be to speak to somebody in the area who knows what they're doing. Get some good advice, and hesitate to use the word consultancy, but advice at least to help guide your decision, because the world shifts so quickly that there might be things out there you're just fundamentally not aware of that might fit your budget or your needs far, far better than something that might be 6 times more expensive.
Yeah, I mean, there's one thing that these big IT vendors have, and that's marketing budget. I'm sure if anyone's been to InfoSec, they've seen that firsthand. But it's not always obvious, what is the best solution for any given situation. So, advice is
your level of need might be that much, but every marketing and every tool is geared for that much.
Absolutely.
Go with what you need.
And finally, what's your last top tip?
Finally, I'd say, don't think you have to buy everything up front. It's not necessarily a whole CapEx scenario. The whole cloud service thing meant everybody's now considering paying monthly for certain things. So the whole OpEx model has become standard effectively for a lot of those. And a lot of hardware vendors are now shifted focus to allow you to do that as well, because traditionally you'd have to pay up front for a huge amount of hardware and technology to get going. Now they offer finance deals the same as any SaaS provider, just so you are essentially paying for your stuff over a number of years, which makes it far more affordable up front, but means that you can start to reap the benefits now and be in a far better place in 3 years' time than you otherwise would have been. So, it's something we certainly do as a company. So, it's definitely a way ahead.
Absolutely. Well, Glenn, thank you again for the insight, and thank you for joining.